Okay, let's get right into it with the third and final video. This is so far my tier list of all the RPGs. These are not all the RPGs I've played, but they are the RPGs that I've played enough where I feel comfortable rating them. And also, these are limited by the RPGs that were on this list. I actually went in and actually added a couple of my favorite RPGs that were not listed in this big list that I found. So, for example, Arcanum was actually not on this list, which is very upsetting to me because Arcanum is one of my favorite RPGs. Um, but yeah, let's go through these last row of games and then we'll be all done. So, Fel Seal. Fel Seal kind of breaks my heart because it could have been like an A game if a few things were different. So it's a Final Fantasy Tactics like, and it has a couple of really good rules. The best rule in this is that, in my opinion, is that you instead of having potions be like Final Fantasy 1 style potions where you just have like a stock of a bunch of them, healing potions, you have, I think it's like 3 per battle, and they refresh every single battle. So you're free to actually use your potions. In fact, it's best that you do. You get an advantage by using them. So that's really cool. There's a bunch of other smaller things that were cool about it, but it had some real issues with the art. In fact, there was some really good art, but the character art was the worst. It just looked really bad, and that was an issue. But also, like, the plot wasn't very interesting. It just didn't seem like it all kind of came together as like a game that I really wanted to play. But I've heard people say really good things about it once you get really into it. So I could see it being a B. For me, it was a C. I bounced off it pretty fast. But it's a shame. It has a lot of potential. Pillars of Eternity. And by the way, so Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 are pretty different games, but I think I'm going to put them both into. This is also another B or C situation. Because both 1 and 2 have different strengths and weaknesses. Um, man, it's really tough. I might have to go with C. Now, I should say with Pillars of Eternity 1, I beat it. 2, I did not beat it, but I played 150 hours of it before finally bailing on it. And they're both like CRPGs, Western style RPGs. They don't use like a D&D system. They have their own system. They're very ambitious in some ways, games. And the best thing about the second one is the fact that the game is extremely like open world, and you've got this boat and you're moving around and you're like doing piracy, and it's very emergent, and there's all these different factions. The best thing about Pillars of Eternity 2 is the faction system, how all the factions have a relationship with each other, and all your NPCs in your party actually have a relationship to each faction. So it's this really cool thing where when you do something bad against one faction, like you can't make everyone love you in Pillars of Eternity 2, and that's awesome. The sad thing about Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 is that they both started as real time with pause games. So the combat is pretty bad. It's not an Infinity Engine bad, but it's pretty bad. And then a very interesting thing happened with Pillars of Eternity 2. A year after it was launched, they made a turn based mode for PoE 2. And it was like they really kind of tried. They really brought it. It wasn't like a phoned in version. But the problem is the game just fundamentally doesn't support that. So like the abilities and stuff were all made for real time with pause. So they're all like the really boring kinds of abilities that you can do in a real time with pause system. And so when you then made it turn based, it wasn't, there was nothing cool you could do. So it didn't really work, which was unfortunate. I kind of recommend looking into Pillars of Eternity, especially 2, as the more ambitious of the two. The first one has some like Kickstarter feeling to it, but the second one is pretty impressive of a game, but not just didn't really come together. The plot didn't was had some issues, and so I never beat number 2, but I played it 150 hours, so that says something. Wasteland 3, I might put this in B, even though I like it less than Pillars of Eternity. I played it only like 10 or 15 hours. It's a very functional, like Western RPG with like XCOM-y kind of combat. The thing that really alienated me though is that it has this like really militaristic cop vibe to it that's just kind of, I don't know, really off-putting, but it's very well made. I still feel like I should go back in and play more Wasteland 3. I don't know. It has this like depressing Fallout vibe that I'm just like not really that excited about anymore. But yeah, you could check out Wasteland 3. It's not too bad. It's definitely a solid game. Next up is Arcanum. Arcanum, I would either put in S or A. Let me see what other games are in A. I think I might put it in S. There's so much about it that's so good. In a way, it's like the most realized of these like Fallout, Torment, kind of like computer RPGs from that era, Baldur's Gate, etc. It's like the most because it's an original universe, and an original system, and a really cool system. And there's so much you can do with the character creation in this game. Like there's so many different kinds of characters you can make, and the game supports that. I recommend listening to Tim Kaine talk about this game. Like there's so much that they put into this game. It's just really ambitious, and it has great cities, great locations. The combat kind of sucks because it's turn based, but it's like really clunky, and it also has real time, which was a big mistake. But the way it ends up working is that you play it in turn based unless you know you're going to win, and then you just press spacebar, it goes to real time, and it basically just fast forwards the combat. So honestly, it actually kind of works all right. But the combat's the weakest part of the game for sure. But it's just such a emergent, dynamic game. And there's an example in Arcanum, a thing that I really like, which is there's a crafting system in Arcanum, but it's only there. It's only something you can access if you go and you actually unlock the skill to become like an engineer, like a mechanic. There's this whole magic slash mechanistic dichotomy in this universe. And the more like magic stuff you do, the more like messes up your tech stuff and vice versa. It's really, really cool. There's so much to like about Arcanum. I really strongly recommend it. Fantastic game. Troika's best game. Oh, that reminds me, we should have Temple of Elemental Evil on here. Let's just say this weird game Conception represents Temple of Elemental Evil. Okay, so everyone knows. What is this? It's Temple of Elemental Evil. And that game would be either an A or a B. I might go with a B. I think I'm going to go with a B, but it's really notable. Again, this is Temple of Elemental Evil. It's really notable because it's like the other than Baldur's Gate 3, maybe it has the best implementation of D&D mechanics in a video game. It's actually a lot more elaborate than Baldur's Gate 3, a lot more. You have these like radials and like sub-radials of like, do normal attack, feint attack, like sweep attack. Like you can do so many weird things. And I remember having this realization with Temple of Elemental Evil that, when you combine a really hard difficulty, because it's a pretty hard game, with like giving the player tons of options, there's this really kind of cool, fun thing that can happen where you're like scouring, all the possibility space to find like what could possibly work. Oh, wait, maybe I could, you can kind of get creative with the combat. And there's a lot of other things to like about Temple of Elemental Evil as well. I would say if you do get it, make sure to get the Circle of Eight community patch. That really, because when it came out, it was super buggy, but it's a really cool game. A lot of the game takes place in this one giant temple, but until you get to that part, it's a kind of a normal CRPG, and there's some really cool stuff in it. In fact, this game had the first time I ever saw, and I think it might be the first gay marriage in a game. And so that's pretty cool. Again, this is not this Conception game. This is Temple of Elemental Evil, also by Troika, same company that did Arcanum. Okay, Undertale. Hard one to rate, right? I feel like I kind of like, so I think the safe thing to do is give it an A. But like, to be honest, I really don't enjoy Undertale. Like, it's an important game. It's a very important game. But I really don't like the combat system, the like dodging projectiles and stuff. And I've never been actually that crazy about, like, I know people really love the whole like, oh, you can do a different thing to like make the monster like you, like say things to the monster and stuff. That kind of stuff comes, I think, from Persona, if I'm not mistaken, or no, the SMT games, I think. I don't know. I just never found that to be that compelling. Like, it's cute, and I really appreciate like the messages of Undertale, and there's some cool music and stuff like that, but I didn't really enjoy it that much. So I'm gonna put it in B. I watched somebody beat it, but I I had no inclination to want to play it. It's not my kind of game. All right, I got a couple more Fire Emblems to throw in here. So this one, Fire Emblem, I believe this is the first one for GBA, and I'm gonna say it's a C. All of the old Fire Emblems have the same problem of they have this like permadeath, which is really a weird thing in the context of what it is, because it basically means you have to reload your save file anytime you lose a guy, or you run the risk of not having enough power to carry forward later on. So that's really weird. Other than that, it's very elemental. It almost feels like more like playing like Advance Wars than it does like playing like a SRPG. But there's something that really holds it back, I think, which is that it's kind of it works on that elemental level, but the difference between this and Advance Wars is that this game is even more lethal, and again you have permadeath, so it really matters. But also, there are sometimes like melee units that will have a ranged attack. So you have to like go and check every single unit, make sure it doesn't have some sneaky little ranged attack. So I don't know. It's you're better off playing Advance Wars than this, It's a lot tighter of an experience. Or if you want like more of an RPG kind of thing, I would play one of the later Fire Emblems. I also had the misfortune of playing Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, which wasn't on this list, even though I have a ton of Fire Emblems on here. They didn't have Shadow Dragon. And I feel like no one ever talks about this game. And it was terrible. I really, really hated it. I'm not going to give it an F because it was coherent. It was together, but it had the old Fire Emblem, kind of permadeath rules, and it was really, really hard. So this was actually, I believe this is a remake of the first Famicom Fire Emblem, if I'm not mistaken, with like new modern pixel art and stuff like that. But I found it to be like really brutal, unforgiving, and I don't remember what else I hated about it, but I really did not like this game at all. So I'm gonna put that in D. And this was one of the games I had on the Nintendo DS, like before I got my R4 card, which allowed me to play a million different games on the DS. So I was kind of stuck with this, and I really tried to like it, and really failed. All right, Digimon CyberSluth. I didn't beat this game. I tried very hard. A friend of mine recommended it, whose opinion I trust very much. And I'm sure that the story does get cool later on. I don't know, I want to say like 15 hours in, something like that. The problem is that you collect, your party is just a bunch of Pokemon kind of things, spreadsheet entries basically. And so they're not terribly exciting to use. And the combat is very fast and very like one hit killish. And just like there's just no space for stuff to like happen ever in the combat system. And yet you do a lot of the combat actually. There's also these visual novel sequences, which I think are what the real appeal of the game is. But it took a while for that to really take off. And I just wasn't that compelled by the story. I have a tendency to have a difficulty getting invested in games where it's like a cyber world and it's a little too abstract for me. It's not grounded enough. And the main character in this game is a, nameless, like, non-character. So it just kind of, it wasn't rooted enough. I didn't understand what the plot was, like why I should care. And I didn't like the Pokemon collecting Pokemon's kind of, system. Although it's nice that you have 3 characters in your party instead of 1, or I guess arguably, like 3 characters that are out and fighting at the same time, I should say. So yeah, that's Digimon CyberSluth. Next up we have Disco Elysium. This one I have to give either an A or an S to. I think I might do A though, because a couple of reasons. One, it's a deeply like, I want to say like it's a thoughtful game. Um and here's the best thing about Disco Elysium that I don't hear people talk about. I don't hear people describe this as a comedy game, but its biggest strength is it's funny. It's extremely funny. The writer's best strength is jokes. And the jokes are fantastic. The characters are funny. The world is really actually very interesting and original. I've never seen anything like it. It's very ambitious in a lot of ways. Deals with like really serious topics like alcoholism. And so I appreciate a lot about it. It also like shoots for the stars in a lot of ways and its politics and misses in a lot of ways. And I also think it had a very ambitious plot that it sort of feels like towards the end it ran out of gas and wasn't sure how to land the plane. And so the ending was a little underwhelming for me, but the fact that they finished it at all is kind of a miracle. And that's not a comment on the dev or anything like that. Like it just the fact that they were able to land the plane of this plot in any way that's at all satisfying was actually really remarkable because, like I said, it's very weird. It's very original. Strongly recommend Disco Elysium. It also has no combat system, which kept me from playing it for a few years, but it's awesome. It's fantastic. I think there should be more games that steal from Disco Elysium and work that way. Because another comment I have about Disco Elysium, I really don't like the dating, yeah, it's like dating sim slash visual novel style of gameplay or of dialogue where characters slide onto the screen and there's text on the bottom. There's something about that where the characters are so divorced from the background, they're so like floating in the ether that it does the opposite of ground them in the space. And I just don't like it. I feel like I'm just reading text, I feel like I'm just reading. I might as well be just reading a book. Whereas when the characters are grounded in the space, so Octopath Traveler 2, for example, doesn't have any paper dolls that come slide on the screen. When there's dialogue, it's just the characters in the space talking. And I like that so much better because it grounds them in the space. They can walk around, they can like look at things, they can pick things up, they can take actions, they can emote with their bodies, even if they're very simple sprites. That's the universe, is this universe of sprites, and they work that way. And Disco Elysium is like that as well. You see the characters in the world doing what they're doing, and I really appreciate that. Okay, and the last game, and this might be the last game for this whole list actually, would be Secret of Mana, which I've not played in a very long time, but I played it a lot back in the day. Its big claim to fame, I mean, it has a few. It has cool music. There's a lot of things to like about Secret of Mana. I would say it's like a solid. I'm putting it in C because I don't like the real-time sort of weird system that they have for the combat system. But the cool thing about it is that you can play this game 3 players, which is very strange. You need like a multi-tap or whatever, but you can play this 3 players. It's neat. But I always felt like Secret of Mana was overrated a little bit, and I maybe need to replay it because it's been a very long time. But I do remember always disliking that combat system. So the way it works is you have this meter that rises, and when it rises up to a certain level, you can press the attack button and your character attacks and deals damage. Now, what happens if you press the button before the meter is all the way full? Well, your character does an attack animation that doesn't do anything or does massively significantly less damage. Either case, you're like betraying this relationship between my pressing the attack button and an attack happening and dealing damage. And so that I really resent the game for that. I really don't like that. I think there's certain things in games that are very like should be like sacrosanct. And one of them is like, yeah, if I press this button, it's going to mean this. Doesn't mean that it's like super effective or whatever, but like it made it feel really, especially when you're like fighting a hard boss or something, you can't help but kind of spam the button a little bit. And it felt so bad to me. And that was something I really did not like about Secret of Mana. But yeah, that's about it for our list. I think this will do it. Definitely make sure you've played all my S tier games. These are the games I recommend most strongly of all. And the A tier games, of course, very good as well. But yeah, and stay away from these dogs. Thank you for watching all these videos. And yeah, I'm going to try to make some more video like this kind of format over time because it seems like people are enjoying them. And thanks, and see you next time.